The saying goes, men should not marry down, and women should not marry up. At that time, my family was quite successful in real estate, and they believed in matching social status, so they found me a girl from a well-off family. However, I just couldn't bring myself to like those pampered, sheltered rich girls. As a result, I had a falling out with Mr. Smith and chose to leave home.
You'll regret this decision, mark my words.
Even when I later found a girl from a poor family and planned to get married, I had no intention of going back. Mr. Smith's temper would surely make him look down on my current girlfriend and force us to break up.
What if your family never accepts us?
But life is unpredictable. Before Mr. Smith could say anything, my girlfriend's family came to our door, insisting that she shouldn't continue with me and should marry someone wealthy.
Look at what you found, some worthless guy. Come home with us now.
Their behavior and words deeply hurt my pride. That day, many of her family members came. All the aunts and uncles who could come were there, and they were quite rude.
Mom, please, I love him.
We were deeply in love, so I stepped forward to stop them.
Auntie, Emily and I truly love each other. Whatever conditions you have, just tell me, and I'll find a way.
My cousin's daughter got a dowry of $2 million, plus $1 million car and a 200 square meter house and gold jewelry. If you can provide that, I'll consider it.
In today's tough economic times, such demands could crush a man. Unless I reconciled with my family, it would be impossible. But I didn't know how to broach the subject with them.
Mom, even if you and Dad worked your whole lives, you couldn't come up with $2 million. You're just making things difficult on purpose.
Mrs. Johnson slapped Emily across the face, unreasonably saying,
I gave birth to you, so I can do whatever I want. If you have the guts, you can leave this world, and I won't care about you anymore.
Emily sat on the ground crying, and it broke my heart. Not wanting to see her suffer, I nodded.
Emily, go back with Annie for now. Give me some time, and I'll find a way.
Mrs. Johnson glared at me before leaving with all the aunts and uncles, taking Emily with them. She was gone for a week. I heard from friends that Emily wasn't eating or drinking and had lost a lot of weight. Her family had even arranged a new suitor for her, the son of a real estate developer.
I can't bear the thought of losing my girlfriend. I have to do something.
After much hesitation, I dialed that number. On the phone, I called out guiltily,
Dad.
After all, it had been 3 or 4 years since I last contacted my family. Mr. Smith fell silent upon hearing my voice.
Are you in trouble?
Knowing me well, he immediately asked if I was in trouble. He understood my stubborn nature too well, so I didn't hold back and told him everything.
It's not a bad thing for you to suffer a bit outside. Come back and seriously consider the match I've arranged for you.
Dad,
I felt a mix of emotions. Just as I was about to lose my temper, I heard his next sentence.
The match I've arranged for you is with a girl named Emily. The meeting is set for tomorrow morning.
Emily? Which Emily are you talking about? Do you have a photo?
Mr. Smith immediately sent me a photo of the girl on WeChat. When I saw it, I was completely stunned. It was John ran away from home because his father had arranged a blind date for him. Little did he know that person would be Emily. By coincidence, they met again. Perhaps it was fate. Just as John was about to head to Emily's house to share the good news, he heard terrible news. Emily, unable to bear the pressure from her family, had harmed herself. John knew Emily's character too well. She would never compromise easily. And her mother, Mrs. Johnson, was excessively selfish and vain. He wasn't surprised she could drive Emily to such an act, but it still hurt deeply. Fortunately, she was okay. That day, all John's old friends who could come showed up. The entrance to his neighborhood was surrounded by various limited edition cars.
John.
They called out to him in unison as he stepped out. They had all come upon hearing about his situation, but John didn't want to make things too complicated.
Thanks for coming, everyone, but I need to handle this alone.
He quietly got into a taxi and asked them to go back. However, none of them left. They silently followed the taxi, making the driver nervous.
Young people these days really know how to have fun. They have good cars, but choose to take a taxi.
Just drive, please. Hurry.
When John arrived, he was greeted by a slap from Mrs. Johnson.
Young man, don't blame me for hitting you. If your daughter lived with a poor boy for a year, you wouldn't be able to stand it either.
Mom, I appreciate you taking care of my wife.
What did you call me?
You might not know, but Emily and I are already married, Mom.
Another slap landed on his face.
What? Married?
No matter how much you hit me, you're still my wife's family, and I respect you, Mom.
Slaps continued to land on John's face.
Divorce? You must divorce. I won't allow my daughter to marry someone without financial stability.
After she had enough, Mrs. Johnson threw a divorce agreement at John.
I'm here to take Emily, not to sign a divorce agreement.
This is Emily's old friend, Jessica. Take a good look at the life Emily used to have. Marry her? Do you think you're worthy?
John glanced at the woman, who was at least an 8 in terms of looks and figure, and realized how much Emily had suffered with him over the years.
Auntie, believe me, I can give Emily a good life.
Is that shirt a brand name too?
Bought it at a night market.
Do you know how much my shirt costs?
I think clothes are just for wearing.
If you can't afford it, just admit it. Stop making excuses for your incompetence. Do you know John?
Of course, John knew because he was John.
John is the top rich second generation in our city. Emily's blind date. I was lucky enough to see him driving a sports car.
Actually, I came here today to inform you that I am.
The scene was tense as Emily dashed out of the house, her voice filled with anguish.
Linda, Mrs. Johnson, can you please stop making things difficult for my husband? It doesn't matter if we have money or not. I love him, and that's enough.
Why would you choose to marry this poor guy instead of John? Emily, I hardly recognize you anymore.
Emily's friend, Linda, added fuel to the fire.
Exactly. Any man who hasn't made $1 million by 30 is basically a failure. No vision, no intelligence, and questionable character. No arguments.
Linda, my marriage is none of your business.
Suddenly, Mrs. Johnson slapped Emily across the face.
She's my guest, and she's on my side. But you're turning against your own family.
Well, I'm standing my ground.
Emily's eyes reddened as she turned to me.
David, haven't you always wanted a child?
I was taken aback and asked Emily what she meant.
I'm pregnant. We're going to have our own baby.
My heart trembled. Mr. Smith had always wanted a grandson, and now his wish could come true.
Say that again if you dare.
I am pregnant, and I will have this baby.
I spent 10 years nurturing your talents in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, and another 10 years making you the most distinguished lady in the region, also you could marry a man of equal standing. And now, with one sentence, I'm pregnant, you want to destroy all my efforts of over 20 years?
Tears streamed down Emily's face.
Mom, we truly love each other. Please, let us be together.
Unless he turns into John, there's no way. That's final.
Mrs. Johnson called in a group of men to once again separate us. Emily should have cried, but not a single tear fell.
There's food I made in the pot. Don't forget to eat. Wait for me at home, and don't do anything foolish. For the sake of our unborn baby, be good.
As I stepped outside, my friends were still standing at the entrance. It was only when they saw me come out that they relaxed slightly, their serious expressions easing. At the same time, I saw Linda, who had previously mocked me, holding a Starbucks cup, taking photos in a friend's luxury car to show off on social media. I said nothing and walked forward silently.
Mike, this is the poor guy I told you about. Emily's useless husband.
The mocking laughter reached my ears, and Mike frowned, looking serious.
Do you really not know who he is?
Isn't he just a loser?
He's my big brother, John.
Linda's face visibly changed.
John.
Mike opened the car door, and I got in without a word. At the same time, I sent a message to Mr. Smith informing him that my wife, Emily, was expecting a grandchild.
Really?
Mr. Smith, having only one son, had always dreamed of having a grandchild.
Yes.
I'm going to have a grandchild. Make sure your wife takes good care of the baby. I'll send some things over.
The next day, I went to a maternity store to buy some prenatal care products and then knocked on Emily's door again. This time, I needed to make it clear to Mrs. Johnson that I was John. There was no need for her to treat me that way. After all, we were going to be family.
Who are you? Are you from the property management?
Even though we had just met last night, I felt a bit hurt.
Auntie, it's me.
How thick-skinned can you be? I'm embarrassed for you. How worthless is your face that you dare to come back?
I made it clear that Mr. Smith had sent me to discuss the engagement and that I had brought many prenatal nutrition products. I thought I had made myself clear, but Mrs. Johnson still didn't understand, and threw the gifts I handed over to the ground. The bottles and jars shattered instantly.
Are you here to cause trouble? Do you know my daughter is meeting John today?
Auntie, please calm down and listen. I came because I am John.
Just as I started to speak, a sarcastic voice came from behind me.
John what? Are you trying to say you're John to deceive my mom and run away with my sister?
I turned around to see a man with glasses walking towards us.
Son, is the hotel not busy? Do you have time to come back?
Isn't my sister meeting her fiancé today? I wanted to see what my future brother-in-law looks like.
It turned out to be Chris.
Several of John's wealthy friends are staying at my hotel, waiting to attend John and my sister's engagement ceremony. Let's see who dares to cause trouble.
I am your brother-in-law.
Are people so poor now that they can be this shameless?
As the two of them exchanged sarcastic remarks, a luxury car pulled up at the door, and a man embodying both wealth and power stepped out. I recognized him as one of Mr. Smith's trusted aides. I had to call him Mr. Anderson.
Such esteemed guests, what an honor!
Mrs. Johnson hurriedly greeted him, with Chris respectfully following behind.
Hello, ma'am. The chairman specifically sent me to deliver some nutritional supplements for Miss Emily.
Mr. Anderson clapped his hands, and several company employees got out of the car, bringing gifts like bird's nest, sea cucumber, and caviar, high-end nutritional products.
Where's my brother-in-law? Why didn't he come along?
Mr. Anderson didn't notice me standing in the corner and checked his watch seriously.
He should have arrived by now. Strange.
I was about to step forward and greet Mr. Anderson when Mrs. Johnson pushed me back.
Why are you still standing here? This has nothing to do with you.
It was only then that Mr. Anderson noticed me standing aside and paused for a second.
Property management?
He's from the property management, here for maintenance. Yes, I'll ask him to leave now.
Young master, since when did our company start doing property management?
Anxious, Mrs. Johnson didn't catch what Mr. Anderson was saying and, worried I might disrupt something, she quickly changed the topic, pulling Mr. Anderson aside. Friendly, what kind of expensive supplements are these? You're too kind.
Mr. Anderson, now distracted, explained.
Serious, the chairman heard that Emily is expecting, so he specifically asked me to bring some supplements to support her. It's the least we could do.
Mrs. Johnson's face turned pale. She glanced at me nervously and exchanged looks with Chris before anxiously explaining to Mr. Anderson.
Anxious, there's been a misunderstanding. Emily isn't expecting. She's not pregnant.
Mr. Anderson was taken aback and looked at me in confusion.
Confused, not pregnant?
I quickly stepped forward to clarify.
Serious, she is. Emily told me herself yesterday. There's no mistake.
Only then did Mr. Anderson relax, knowing that Mr. Smith, who was eagerly looking forward to a grandchild, couldn't handle such a disappointment.
Relieved, all right, I'll take my leave then.
As soon as Mr. Anderson left, Mrs. Johnson slapped me across the face.
Angry, you really have a knack for causing trouble, don't you? Are you trying to ruin my daughter? Desperate, Mom, I didn't. Shouting, didn't you? Otherwise, how would they know Emily is expecting? Admit it, you told them. Pleading, yes, I did, but it wasn't to cause trouble.
I simply wanted to share the joy with those who should know. Chris, without any hesitation, started berating me.
Unfriendly, some people are poor and still act so self-righteous. Does your family have a decent house? Can you afford a good car? Forget those. Even buying a branded bag would bankrupt you. You're poor and you want to drag someone down with you. Do you have any conscience?
Mrs. Johnson, in her fury, instructed Chris to keep Emily away from me.
Serious, son. Help your sister stay at your hotel for a few days. Don't let this scoundrel see her again. Confident, don't worry, Mom. The minimum spend at our hotel is more than he could earn in a lifetime. I guarantee this riffraff won't get in. Sad that day, my wife was confined by her family. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I could endure it. What I couldn't endure was Mrs. Johnson's next words. Serious, find a reliable doctor for your sister and take care of the situation. Terrified, I panicked and immediately confronted them, revealing my true identity as John, and begged them not to go through with it. But they wouldn't listen to me. That very day, they confined Emily. Desperate, please, don't do this. I am John.
Knowing Emily's temperament, I feared for her well-being and rushed to the hotel. I found her in a private room, with Chris and some women trying to persuade her to terminate the pregnancy.
Unfriendly, well, look who it is.
With Chris's insult, the several elegant women in the 60-square-meter private room all turned their disdainful gazes on me.
Disdainful, is this Emily's ex? Mocking look at him, you can tell he's a total loser. I'd rather stay single than lower my standards with such trash. Serious, listen up, I am John.
The room.
Serious, the room fell silent, then erupted in laughter. A few socialites even patted my head affectionately.
Little brother, these tricks are old news to us. You can't fool anyone with them.
I'm different from you all. Most of your socialite statuses are fabricated.
Serious John pointed out Linda, who was notorious for posting a photo online and thinking she was superior.
You talk as if you're better than anyone else. Chris's words are so true. Even in tough times, you act so self-righteous.
Serious Chris must be the name of my brother-in-law.
Then tell me, how much is this watch worth?
I don't know.
Don't know, yet you claim to be a rich second generation?
I've never used such a low-end watch.
Serious Linda laughed on the spot, flaunting her Hermes watch.
Low end? This is Hermes, 438,000 yuan, bought from the official store, with certificates and anti-counterfeiting codes. Haha, little brother, you're really something.
Cheerful ha ha ha. Serious after a burst of piercing laughter, Emily couldn't bear it any longer and stood up.
Enough, enough, enough.
Sad, she turned to John with a heavy heart.
Let's get a divorce. Stop humiliating yourself. I can't stand seeing the man I love most being ridiculed. Have some dignity, my husband. I believe you'll live a better life without me, Emily.
Darling, you might not believe what I'm about to say, but I swear every word is true. Actually, I am the one you ran away from years ago.
Serious just as John was about to speak, Emily suddenly bent over in pain, her face turning pale.
Sis? What's wrong?
The baby.
Serious Chris instinctively dialed emergency services and, 10 minutes later, an ambulance arrived at the hotel, taking Emily straight to the hospital. Serious, however, Chris didn't accompany her. Instead, he smugly addressed John.
Don't worry, my mom is at the hospital. My sister will be fine, but the baby will.
Serious, the nearby socialites shamelessly praised Chris's tactics.
No matter what, she's your sister. You're really ruthless, giving your own sister that substance.
Anyway, no one can stop John from becoming my brother-in-law.
That's right. If you become John's brother-in-law, you'll have cars and houses in no time.
Serious, hearing this, John trembled all over. He wasn't just harming his sister, he was endangering the unborn child.
Pray that your sister doesn't lose the baby, or not even a miracle can save you.
Serious, after yelling, John rushed out of the hotel. Serious, the night wind was cold, but it couldn't compare to the chill in his heart. Serious, when John arrived at the hospital, Mrs. Johnson seemed to have anticipated his arrival and blocked the entrance.
You're just in time. Sign the divorce papers.
What about the baby?
Gone.
Serious gone? My father's long-awaited grandchild was gone just like that. How could I explain this to him?
You can treat me however you want because you're my mother-in-law, but doing this to an unborn child is a big deal. You should explain this to my father yourself.
As I walked, tears began to stream down my face. A grown man crying all the way. How could a family be so heartless, driven by money to the point of losing all sense of kinship? But as I cried, I wiped away my tears and finally stopped at the door of the hotel private room. Inside, Chris was drinking with a few flirtatious women. I could vaguely hear his laughter.
Wanna bet? I bet that fool is too scared to show up. If I lose, I'll rent a Ferrari for you to take pictures with. If you lose, you all stay with me tonight, haha.
Then came the sycophantic laughter of the women.
I say Emily is just asking for it. Serves her right. Getting involved with that trash. She brought it on herself.
I couldn't take it anymore. How could my wife have such a brother? I kicked the door open, channeling all my pent-up anger into my fists. Amidst the women's terrified looks and screams, I landed a heavy punch on Chris's face.
This one's for your sister.
And another punch followed.
This one's for your nephew.
After a few punches, Chris was sprawled on the floor.
You hit me? Just wait, I'll call for backup.
No more pretending, it's all out in the open now. I picked up Chris's phone from the floor.
You have 10 minutes to call everyone you can. If they don't show up in 10 minutes, we'll meet at the hospital.
Just you wait!
Chris frantically called for reinforcements, making calls for a good half hour until the phone was nearly overheating. About 40 minutes later, Chris pointed outside and yelled,
Let's not do this inside the hotel. Outside, my guys are all out there.
Following Chris out of the hotel, I saw a group of over a dozen people, some drunk and holding beer bottles. Emily's family had some financial clout, and Chris was considered a wealthy and handsome guy by ordinary standards. I wasn't surprised he had some lackeys, but I didn't expect so many.
Heck, quite a crowd.
Chris licked the blood from his lips and slapped my face, taunting.
What's the matter? Not so tough now, huh? Weren't you going to send me to the hospital, brother-in-law?
Just then, the roar of a sports car engine echoed down the street, finally coming to a stop at the hotel entrance. The group of young men blocking the door scattered, intimidated by the imposing presence of the car. Chris, being the hotel manager, immediately pushed me aside and went to flatter the new arrival.
Welcome, sir. Security, park the guest's car in the best spot.
The man who got out of the car exuded authority and didn't even glance at Chris. Instead, he walked straight towards me.
President, the chairman said you're meeting Miss Emily tomorrow and asked me to bring you this car. Also, the chairman heard Miss Emily was hospitalized and wanted me to ask why. Is the baby okay?
Hearing this, a wave of sadness washed over me again. I didn't know if I should tell Mr. Smith that Emily had lost the baby. If he found out, he would surely blame the entire Johnson family, and there would... Mr. Anderson nodded and said,
As long as the child is fine, there's an outfit prepared for you in the car. Dress properly. After all, your father is the chairman of the largest corporation in the city. You can't always dress like this.
I took the car keys Mr. Anderson handed me, feeling heavy-hearted as I opened the car door under everyone's gaze. Inside, there was a branded suit and a Patek Philippe watch. Just as I was examining them, Chris appeared at the car door.
Are you really John?
Tell your friends to leave and get in the car.
Chris hurriedly dispersed the people at the hotel entrance and then obediently sat in the back seat, remaining silent the entire time. I slowly put on the watch and asked him,
Is there anything you want to say to me?
He still didn't speak, not even daring to look at me.
You want a wealthy brother-in-law, and your family wants a rich son-in-law. But do you know how much my father wants a grandson? You took that away from him. If he finds out, it won't be a small matter.
Chris's expression changed rapidly, and after a long pause, he finally said,
Yes, my sister is healthy. She can conceive again.
I grabbed Chris by the throat.
Is that even human talk?
Chris was almost suffocating from my grip. I released him, my eyes red with anger.
Is the point that your sister had a miscarriage? It's your shameless behavior of betraying your own sister for profit. My father despises people who value profit over family the most.
Chris knelt awkwardly in the car, begging for forgiveness. But some mistakes can be forgiven, and some cannot. Thinking of Emily's pitiful situation, I suppressed my resentment towards her family.
Come with me to the hospital and explain everything. My father must not find out about Emily's miscarriage.
But as soon as we arrived at the hospital, we saw Mr. Anderson's car parked at the entrance. Clearly, Mr. Anderson was worried and had come to the hospital himself. I immediately felt a surge of anxiety. Rushing to the ward door, I saw Mr. Anderson inside, talking to Mrs. Johnson. I pushed the door open and walked in, with Chris following behind me.
Can't you see I have important guests? Get out, get out.
I glanced at the hospital bed, but Emily was nowhere to be seen.
Where is Emily?
She had just undergone a procedure. She should be resting in bed, right? But no one answered my question. Mr. Anderson frowned and asked me,
Is it true that Miss Emily had a procedure?
I felt a sense of foreboding and quickly called out to Mrs. Johnson.
Mom, why are you still mad at me?
Then I turned to Mr. Anderson and said,
Mrs. Johnson is just angry. She's talking nonsense. The child is fine and hasn't undergone any procedure.
Who are you calling Mom? Don't call me that.
Even at this moment, Mrs. Johnson hadn't realized the situation. She pushed me aside and rushed to Mr. Anderson.
I won't hide it anymore. My daughter was unfortunate in her choice, but rest assured, the child is indeed gone. I swear.
Mr. Anderson, having been through the ups and downs of life with my father, was too experienced to be fooled by such schemes. He immediately understood that Mrs. Johnson had orchestrated this and turned to inform my father of the situation.
Chairman, yes, understood.
After hanging up, Mr. Anderson said to me,
The chairman wants you to come home with me. The wedding is off.
Mrs. Johnson stood at the door, nervously asking Mr. Anderson,
What do you mean by taking him home with you?
Chris, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke up.
Mom, don't you get it? He is John.
For a full 4 or 5 minutes, Mrs. Johnson said nothing, her face a complex mix of shock, despair, and regret.
Say that again. Who is he?
Chris, regretting his words, replied,
John, the biological son of the chairman of the White Group.
Mrs. Johnson collapsed to the ground, muttering repeatedly.
Impossible, impossible.
I ignored her and once again focused on the empty hospital bed. Because Emily had once experienced a severe emotional crisis, I was genuinely afraid she might do something drastic again.
Where is Emily?
Mrs. Johnson finally spoke.
I don't know either. She disappeared half an hour ago. Maybe she went to the restroom.
Upon hearing this, I was furious.
Who takes half an hour in the restroom? How could a mother be so unconcerned about her own daughter? Is money all you care about? If anything happens to my wife, I won't forgive you.
I rushed out of the hospital room, frantically searching the hospital. Finally, I found my wife's fragile figure at the stairwell corner. She was barefoot, wearing a thin hospital gown, sitting on the cold floor with her long hair covering her tear-streaked face. I sighed in relief and, feeling a pang of heartache, took off my coat and draped it over her, gently calling,
Honey.
Upon hearing my voice, Emily burst into tears.
I'm so sorry, darling.
I gave her my coat and softly reassured her.
We could try for another child.
Emily then lifted her head, a hint of confusion on her face.
Who told you we lost the baby?
Your mom said so.
She lied to you. The baby is fine and healthy. She may be a bit materialistic, but she wouldn't harm her own granddaughter.
A daughter?
Yes, a daughter.
At that moment, Mrs. Johnson also arrived at the stairwell, guilt-ridden.
Son-in-law, all the blame is on me. I don't want my mistakes to burden my children. If you can forgive me, please take Emily home.
After saying that, Mrs. Johnson and Chris left together. Emily looked at me, trembling with disbelief.
I can't believe it. My mom actually changed. Is this real?
Yes, it's real.
Honey,
Yes?
the baby is hungry.
My wife said, touching her belly with tearful eyes.
Let's go home. I'll cook something delicious for you.
But I didn't forget to send a message to Mr. Anderson, informing him that the baby was fine. Mr. Anderson quickly replied, asking if the engagement ceremony would proceed as planned. I thought for a moment and then replied that Emily and I had already registered our marriage, but never had a proper wedding. We could take this opportunity to invite friends and family and have a belated celebration. A few days later, Mr. Smith announced the wedding at a company event. Coincidentally, Emily was browsing the local news that day and saw the White Group's announcement.
John is getting married too?
Why do you regret it?
I just find it strange. First, my mom compromises, and then there's news of John's wedding. Isn't it odd?
I looked at her seriously.
What if one day you found out your husband is actually John? How would you react?
I stared into her eyes, not wanting to miss any change in her emotions. Emily laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. How could such coincidences happen in the world?
UST, as I was about to respond, Mr. Anderson appeared at the door.
Young Master John has sent me to pick up Miss Emily for the wedding. The car is waiting outside.
Pick me up for the wedding?
Not just you, Miss Emily. Your mother and brother are also invited.
Thank you for John's kind invitation, but I don't want to attend. Sorry.
Emily's face tightened with doubt. The announcement of the wedding was too sudden. I waved Mr. Anderson to wait outside and tried to comfort her. Maybe they genuinely want to invite your family. After all, the two families will be working together in the future. It's a courtesy you should consider.
Really? But I can't shake this uneasy feeling.
Of course, you can choose to refuse. After a few minutes of consideration, Emily agreed, but with one condition. I had to stay by her side the entire time. I won't leave you for a lifetime. With my constant reassurance, Emily got into Mr. Anderson's car smoothly. As soon as we arrived at the venue, Emily sensed something was off. First, half of the guests were her relatives and friends, even her high school classmates, who looked at her with congratulatory eyes. Second, Mrs. Johnson was going from table to table, toasting everyone like a mother-in-law. Finally, the sign at the entrance clearly read, "Groom John, Bride Emily."
I knew my mom wasn't that kind-hearted. Honey, let's go.
Almost simultaneously, Mrs. Johnson walked over with a beaming smile.
Emily, your wedding with John is about to start. Why aren't you in your wedding dress?
Mom, didn't you say you wouldn't force me?
What nonsense are you talking about? How am I forcing you? This was all arranged with your boyfriend.
What do you mean by arranged?
I simply replied, "Auntie is right. Let's not waste time. The wedding is about to start."
Honey, what do you mean? Are you asking me to marry John?
I nodded without showing any emotion.
I see. No wonder my mom changed her mind so quickly. You all planned this together. Honey, have you decided to leave me? What about our promise of never parting?
Tears started to fall from Emily's eyes. Go inside. You're the bride today. Don't cry.
You jerk!
After saying that, I turned and walked away. Instead of leaving, I went to the dressing room and put on the groom's suit. Not long after, I heard the host's panicked voice from the venue.
The bride ran away in her wedding dress.
Although unexpected, it was foreseeable. Emily's personality made it possible. Running out of the hotel, a friend pointed to a taxi that had just started.
The bride got into a taxi and ran away.
I quickly jumped into the wedding car and the other wedding cars followed, forming a long line on the street, chasing the taxi. Finally, on a bridge, we forced the taxi to stop.
John, there are so many women in the world. Why do you insist on marrying me? I'm 3 months pregnant, and I have body odor and smelly feet. If you keep pushing me, I'll jump off this bridge.
Emily opened the car door, ready to jump, scaring everyone into forming a circle around her.
Don't come any closer, or I'll really jump.
Emily sat on the stone railing, warning everyone. Honey. I walked up and gently called out. She recognized my voice in an instant after years of being together.
Honey?
Just as Emily turned to look at me, she accidentally fell off the railing. Without thinking, I jumped after her. But we didn't fall into the river. Instead, we landed on an inflatable cushion on a private yacht piloted by Mr. Anderson.
John, are you okay?
Honey, are you okay?
Are you John?
After docking the yacht, Mr. Anderson pulled us up from the cushion and smiled.
Your father and I were also surprised by this. When we arranged your engagement years ago, both of you chose to run away from home, but secretly got married. Maybe it's fake. I envy you.
Why didn't you tell me earlier?
You didn't say anything either. Emily's fists landed on me. Then she took off her wedding dress and resolutely stood at the edge of the yacht.
Did you forget? I'm a provincial